At a conference like CMSC, we have an opportunity to meet up with some of the top experts in the world when it comes to MS research and clinical care. But we don't hear very much from the people who are actually living with MS, and I believe that's a really important perspective to include. Kristine Werner Ozug is a member of the RealTalk MS team that many of you have heard before. Kristine lives with MS, so I always look forward to hearing her thoughts and getting her perspective on the presentations and conversations that took place at this year's Consortium of MS Centers annual meeting. So, Kristine, what did you see? What did you hear? And what do you think?
We heard quite a bit, I think. And one of the first things I'd like to touch on was Dr. Anthony Feinstein's 40 years of MS neuropsychiatry. And it was also 40 years of CMSC. So it dovetailed nicely together. And he talked about how our approaches to understanding and treating conditions like depression and cognitive issues have evolved over the past 40 years, as everyone can imagine, and since the consortium was formed, and particularly how the disease process of MS in certain regions of the brain where there is damage has been linked to depression, and other regions of the brain are linked to cognitive issues that we experience living with MS. And tools such as MRI allow researchers and scientists to visualize those brain changes that correlate with the challenges we have with depression and cognitive issues. And because of that, there's been an increase in research in these areas in neuropsychiatry after the tools like MRI were implemented, so scientists can better understand how common these problems are in MS and also how profoundly they affect our lives every day. And he also touched on how the treatment of choice for depression is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, as it's most commonly known. And for those that don't know, this is a form of talk therapy where those of us that have participated in it learn to evaluate and adjust like negative thinking patterns and thoughts. And I myself have been through this for a number of years, and it's not something that can happen overnight. It takes a while to understand where those thoughts and patterns come from, why they're appearing, and you kind of have to look for those when they happen and retrain yourself. And it's an ongoing daily process for me, even though I've been out of therapy for a few years. But it is quite helpful, I can attest. And cognitive therapy and cognitive rehabilitation is also playing an important role in the care for those of us with cognitive dysfunction. And that's typically given by a speech therapist. And I have participated in that several times. I call them tune-ups. And I would encourage people, if they can, to seek out a speech therapist if they're having cognitive dysfunction. They can help you with tips and tools to help you with tasks, executive functioning, memory, and word finding issues. And if you want to hear more about Dr. Feinstein's talk or research, you had a great talk with him in episode 454.
Well, thank you for that. I'm a big fan of his. I will say that outright. I think, and the reason I am is Dr. Feinstein always brings the evidence. He, as you pointed out, he has been a big proponent through his own research uh, in using MRI to be able to see depression among people living with MS and be able to see where the cognitive issues actually are occurring in people with MS. And, being able to identify, that's kind of the first step to understanding that things like depression, uh, they're, it's a symptom. A lot of people tend to believe that if you get the news that you're living with a chronic illness like MS, obviously you're going to have an emotional response to that. It's going to make you feel sad.
Right.
That's not what clinical depression is. And this isn't about being sad because you have MS. This is something that can keep people from getting out of bed in the morning. It keeps them from their jobs, it keeps them from their families, it keeps them from engaging in virtually every aspect of their lives. And so it's a symptom that needs treatment. And I guess the tricky part is very often when you hear somebody is being treated for depression, you hear that they're being prescribed a medication. Very often it's an SSRI, antidepressant drug. And the fact is, SSRIs have been shown not to work all that well in people with MS.
Exactly.
It's because there's something different going on in their brain as opposed to someone who doesn't have MS. And that's where CBT can be wonderful. And what's really great about CBT is it is a form of talk therapy, but you don't have to be talking to someone in the same room. It's something that can be delivered online and has been shown to be effective online. So I think there's not only good news because so many people, one out of every two people with MS, will be diagnosed with depression at some point. And the good news there is something for them. There may not be a treatment that's going to cure MS, but there are treatments that are effective at eliminating depression. And hopefully that message gets out.
Yes. And I also think sometimes people think that, I have cognitive dysfunction and therefore there's nothing I can do. And I was, devastated to learn over the years my personal cognitive dysfunction. I had three neuropsychological evaluations, and each one was worse. But then I learned, no, I can't reverse it, but there are tools and strategies that I can learn to help myself deal with my deficits. And that's where good speech therapists come in, adapting different things, adapting your day, planning your day. And I'm not saying I'm great at it all the time, every day. It is something I struggle with, but the tools are there, and sometimes I forget to remember the the tools, which is another aspect of it. But I hope that message gets out as well.
So what else did you hear at CMSC?
So we attended a very interesting talk about cell-based therapies. Dr. Jeff Cohen and Dr. Jaime Imatola presented. And so what did we learn? And I think there are still questions that remain about patient selection and the risk of these procedures and transplant protocols. So who is an ideal candidate for what they're referring to as immune system reset and some of these stem cell therapies? Usually what we're hearing now is it's typically younger patients with active, um, what they're referring to as relapsing MS. who have not responded to high efficacy therapies. There are ongoing trials like Beat MS, which we've talked about with Dr. Jeff Cohen, that's comparing HSCT against high efficacy disease modifying therapies. And Dr. Jeff Cohen also talked about CAR T therapy, which is modifying CAR T oncology therapies to address B cells in MS. But again, I think, we learned there is some risk. They're still trying to identify who might be right for this type of procedure in the MS population, and what are the side effects and what is really the outcomes. And Jaime Imatola had a very good presentation, I thought, about stem cell tourism, is what he terms it, which is MS patients wanting, of course, stem cell therapy when they have severe MS and they're looking for an answer, and going to other countries that are offering this treatment. But he presented on the risks and dangers of doing that. And some of them are quite severe. He talked about the fact that these clinics are for profit and they're not proven. They're sometimes not ethical, and they're very costly. And they don't perform, rigorous clinical trials like we do here in the US. And so you don't really know what their outcomes are or what the benefits are. And they have shown complications, some as severe as stroke, brain inflammation, paralysis, infection, severe infections such as sepsis, and spinal cord tumors. So he really wanted everyone in the room, the healthcare providers, to be aware when MS patients come to them and ask about going to another country to seek stem cell treatment, about the possibility of being taken for spending a lot of money with not having proven outcomes and potentially having life-threatening complications.
And they are life-threatening. People, unfortunately, have come back from some of the stem cell clinics in other countries, specifically in Mexico, in Panama, Costa Rica, and they have died as a result of the infection that soon follows. It's unfortunate. But it's, they're not only are these clinics not particularly well monitored at all, but even simple things, safety, hygiene, sanitation, not all the same as what we have come to expect here in the US. What they do offer is access to a treatment that otherwise it's hard to come by. And when you can come by it in the US, it's extremely costly. It's something that is still under study and has not been FDA approved. So there are risks going to some of these stem cell clinics that are out there to make money from people who are desperate for a solution and can find the money to pay for it. There's a very well-known case because the person involved was a BBC news commentator, and she found that going to Mexico for a stem cell treatment, this is a woman who lived with MS, she found that going to Mexico for a stem cell treatment was going to cost her about 65,000 pounds. We're in the UK. So there was a big fundraising effort because she was well known, and she was able to raise the money, and she went, and because she's a reporter, she reported not specifically on the process, but on the process of going and getting the treatment and then returning. And within 11 months of her return, not only was she no better than she was before she left, she was worse. And she was very honest about that. So yeah, there are unfortunately the stories that you won't read on the websites of these clinics that offer these services. But sadly, these stories very much exist.
And we did an episode about this, episode 94. So we've been tracking this for a while.
Yeah, we have.
So I thought it was a great message, especially from somebody who is more than well versed in this topic.
Very much so. So,
Um,
what else do you have for us?
so another theme was there was a lot of talk and presentations about wearables and AI. And what we learned, I thought this was really interesting. I did not know this, that over 50% of people in the US use some type of wearable, such as a smartwatch. Other wearables can be pedometers, anything that you use to keep track of some aspect of your health or wellness. It's over 50%. And most people use them to track their sleep or sleep patterns. And I wouldn't, that wouldn't have been my guess. I would have thought steps. So you
Me
and
too.
I think
Yeah.
yeah, you and I were pretty surprised when we learned that. But what we did learn, and I didn't know this also, is that commercial smartwatches, such as, Garmin's or Apple or Fitbit, has limitations, especially for people living with MS, because they are calibrated using young, healthy adults. So in this presentation, they were talking about using it to track sleep, which a lot of people with MS, I think, might use it this way, amongst other things like your steps. And researchers use commercial wearables when they do studies for sleep and rehabilitation, which are a lot more expensive, but a lot more accurate to give them the data that they're looking for. But the challenges exist with getting that rich data from those wearables into what we know as an EHR system, or the electronic healthcare record, so that people like us that are used to going in there and viewing our test results or viewing our appointments, and so we can see that data, and also for your healthcare provider, your clinician, to see that data, to see how well the device tracked you in the research, whether it was for sleep or whether it was for rehab. So, Dr. Riley Beauvais at UCSF led a team. This I thought was amazing, to create a specialized interface to get that data into their electronic healthcare record for not just MS, but a lot of their specialties, so that the healthcare providers and the patients can see the data from different wearables, because it's important data that you can see over time how somebody is doing with whatever it is that they're trying to track, to see how you're doing in your wellness. And also, Dr. Brad Willingham at Shepherd Center had a really nice presentation on an interface that they made to get their data from different wearable technologies so they can view it for research. So the challenges of getting the data exist, and the researchers are getting really creative on their own about ways to be able to view that data and parse it for their own research and for the other side, for our visits and for the patient.
Was just going to say that what you're describing, I think, is just part of the natural evolution of a new technology finding its way first into research and then into clinical care. The big advantage this offers to the patient community is think about your appointment with your neurologist. You see this person once a year, maybe once every 6 months, and you do that 25-foot walk and they time you. Well, if your appointment is at 9 a.m., that 25-foot walk may look one way. If your appointment is 4:30 in the afternoon, it could look different. If you've just come in from parking your car and walking through a hot garage or a parking lot and it's 90 degrees with 85% humidity, then you may perform very differently.
Are you describing Atlanta weather
I'm trying to imagine it.
where
Here
I
in Los
live?
Angeles, it's very different. But yeah, but if that's your experience, you're going to perform differently on all the tests, everything. Um, so is that really a snapshot of how you're doing, or is that a snapshot of how you're doing in the 30 to 40 minutes you might actually be in that office? The advantage of a wearable is you get a 360-degree profile of that individual, how they're walking, what their steps look like, and how they're interacting with that wearable throughout the entire day. And then comes the middleware component, the software that will take all of that raw data that is constantly streaming in and actually be able to analyze it and tell your clinician the things they need to know. So your doctor doesn't have to become a data specialist. It's
No.
just like any other piece of software that's going to give them a report. And if you're functioning within a certain parameter, it's going to be fine. But if something changes that requires them to know about it, they're going to be notified. And that's an opportunity for their office to reach out to you and find out what's going on, and if you need to come in and maybe talk about either what's happening or maybe think about a different disease modifying therapy. Well, whatever the next step might be, you're able to take that next step. So we're going from the concept of wearables that people might use to track sleep or steps to how they're actually going to improve the quality of MS care that you receive from your doctor.
Yeah, and I also view it as a way to be proactive and as an intervention where they can also take that as an opportunity to prescribe physical therapy because so often I hear that being a more of a reactive approach. And I'm fortunate as to where I go. We're very proactive, and I'm hoping the more this technology gets used and implemented, and you can see slight changes, that rehabilitation will become more prescribed and will be more helpful for people as part of their wellness plan, is how I envision it.
I think you envision it right. So what else?
Oh, and I wanted to
Yeah.
mention we talked about Dr. Bove and Dr. Block's wearable research and their digital tools in episode 457, which was part one of our CMSC coverage. So if anyone wants to learn more. And we also had a great talk with Dr. Willingham about AI and the impact on patient care in episode 413. And we have an upcoming episode from CMSC where we talked with Dr. Willingham about his research, and that will be coming up. So just
Well
wanted to
said.
mention that. So the next topic that I found very interesting that we attended was on generics and biosimilars with Dr. Darren Akuda. And what did we learn? So, Dr. Akuda's work in this, I believe, serves as a cautionary warning that not all generic treatments are equal to their brand name originators. And it revealed how subpotent generics can sometimes spark a disease relapse when people are on the brand name and then they switch to a generic, usually because their insurance made the change. The research was interesting, and it had to do with the manufacturer. And, different manufacturers make different generics, and sometimes the batches weren't as reliable, and sometimes it was the manufacturer of those batches. So I don't know if you want to comment on anything else, but
I mean, it was a really interesting presentation because, as so often is the case, an insurance company is going to simply let a patient know that they'll be switching to a generic medication. It's not typically an option given. And that's a tough part. And I should also point out, as Dr. Okuda did, not all generics are bad. Some of them,
yeah,
some of them are every bit as good as the original drug, right? But you don't know which is which. And unfortunately, if you're someone who's been prescribed a generic, you don't have access to a lab to check the actual medication you receive to determine if you've got a good generic or one that may be lacking. And by lacking, it may have a fraction of whatever that important ingredient is that makes the medication work. So it's tough. It's, as you pointed out, it's a cautionary tale without, at this point, any real path to resolution. Simply be aware that when you are on a generic medication and you are experiencing more symptoms than you had in the past, it could be because the generic you are on has not been delivering the level of medication you should be prescribed. And that's a conversation worth having with your neurologist.
yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. If you were on a brand, you switch to a generic and you start having new symptoms or old symptoms coming back, you're just not feeling the same, definitely bring that to your neurologist's attention
Yep.
for sure. That's the bottom line. That's the message.
Anything else catch your eye?
So you and I did comment on there seemed to be a thread in the conference about the voice of lived experience and the voice of the patient, the importance of the patient voice, and making sure the patient and caregiver voices were heard and incorporated. And we heard a lot of phrases such as they want, they need, they ask for, they being patients, caregivers. And I think this is a great first step. We probably didn't hear this much in years past. I think an even better next step would be to invite some of us, some of you, with that lived experience, with the thoughts of what you want and what you need and what you ask for on some of these panel discussions to give those examples when those types of comments are made, or when healthcare providers and researchers and scientists are saying they've incorporated the feedback. So then those of us can give the examples of how we did so. And that's my hope for the future.
Yeah, I share that hope. It's long been, as you know, it's long been a pet peeve of mine that we will be at a research conference, and it's not just this research conference, it's virtually all of them, because I find the top researchers all recognize the value of hearing from people who are living with MS. So they mention it in their presentations, but they're when you have three experts on MS talking about the importance of incorporating the patient voice, you need to have the patient voice as part of that presentation. I think, and you're right. I share your hope that that is the logical next step. I can understand on the one hand why these conferences are not geared for a patient audience because,
Exactly.
frankly, the science gets very deep and gets very jargony. They're all talking sciency, and that's what it's one of the reasons we do this podcast, to kind of translate their language into language the rest of us can understand.
Yes.
That doesn't happen at these conferences, and so it's
Right.
pretty high level. On the other hand, as I said, I can understand why a patient might have a tough time keeping up with a presentation that's being given at the 30,000-foot level, assuming everybody's had med school, everybody's had their residency, everybody's had their fellowship, and they talk like this all the time. But on the other hand, as I said, if you are making the point that the patient voice makes a difference in research, you should have somebody with that voice making the case for you rather than speaking for them. I hope you're right, and I think you are. I think we will see more of this as time goes by. Um, but this was a first step. It was a good one. We're ready for step two.
Mhm. Yes, and I completely agree with you. And I don't I don't believe it needs to be every presentation, every scientific poster, but I do think for the ones that actually had patient participation or patient feedback or design up front, it would be nice to hear a perspective from a sample selection of people who contributed to that process.
Absolutely
Not
agree.
just for you and I, but I think it's valuable for the clinicians. I think it's valuable for the researchers and the scientists that are in the audience listening, especially for the young fellows and researchers, because what you and I hear so often is that they don't really get to interact with patients that often. And when they do, it really ties together what the purpose is of their work.
It does. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your patient voice with us today. I always look forward to hearing what you think are some of the highlights of the meeting and having you talk about them. So thanks for that. I'll look forward to this fall. It's the next big MS research conference. It'll be ECTRIMS this year in Toronto, Canada. So we
Yeah.
will we will be talking to you in Toronto.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thank you.